What's up, Dark Web theologians and Four Dragon friends? Ricky here from the CTDW. If you don't already know me, just giving you guys a heads up about Giant June month, which I'm sure you've seen on all the social media that we run all month long. Guys, we're talking American giants this much. Now you're thinking, it's the end of June. What's going on? Yeah, I know. First episode for Giant June month drops tomorrow. But what better way to celebrate Giant June than in July, because we're talking about American giants. It just makes sense, right? If you guys want to head over to the shop as well and pick yourselves up some awesome CTDW Giant June month merch, and just regular merch as well that we have there, check it out, see if you like something, support the cause. We are always trying to reveal the works of the enemy. So without further ado, check this episode out. Today we are talking about American giants, their anatomy, and kind of their crossover with the indigenous peoples. Are they also giants? Lots of questions to be answered. Stick around, guys.
Discussing the topics your church won't touch. The Christian Theological Dark Web Podcast.
Four Dragon friends and Dark Web theologians, you guys ain't got no idea how excited I am about this episode today. This has been an episode that has been unbelievably difficult to film. We're at the end of Giant June month, unfortunately. I have not been able to put out podcasts. I've been putting out tons of content on social media, but it's been very difficult to record this episode. And I think you guys actually might see why as I move forward. And I'll just mention here real quickly, it is very well known that giant hunters in particular tend to have lots of difficulties, storms, and other just random occurrences come against them whenever they're looking for giants. So I want you guys to keep that in mind as we start today. If you guys are new to this channel, welcome. This is the place where you will hear about all the fringe stuff, but you're going to hear about it through not only a Christian theological worldview and lens, but also we're going to try and make sense of not only God's reality, but we're going to view it through how the Bible says things. We should think about these things and what conclusions we should draw from them. So if you're new, thanks for joining in today. This is going to be an awesome episode. These next 4 episodes will be all about American giants. And to be fair, it's actually only two are in English, 2 in Spanish, as you guys know the drill. So this will be the same content. If you have friends that speak Spanish that prefer that information in Spanish, check that out. If you're an English speaker, you're in luck. This is your episode. So today we're going to be talking about that. Now, if you have not already done so, like I mentioned, it's Giant June month, all month long. We're talking giants. You can head over to the actual store that I have on our bio page. Check it out. It's going to be in the comments here for this episode as well. Go pick up yourself some Giant June month. And let's snuff the Nephilim, man, together. Let's bring them out, expose them, and show the world what the enemy's plans are. So yeah, that's what we're looking at, guys. Follow us on Twitter. Follow us on X, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, TikTok, all those places. We are booming right now, really gaining some traction. You guys might be noticing I've got on the American hat today. Well, that's because we're talking about American giants. Now, this is a convoluted topic, as the Nephilim tend to be. I think most of us really only think about the fact that the Nephilim themselves came to the earth. They were the offspring of human women and the gods, the angels, the watchers, whatever you want to call them. And we kind of, that the rest is kind of amorphous. We've got stuff like Atlantis and things like that. And these kind of point to these other things. And we see other gods and religions and cultures talk about them too. But it is definitely a mystery, all the goings on. So today I want to try and shed a little bit of light, answer some questions, but also dig up some new questions as well. No pun intended. We're talking about a lot of giant bones that have been dug up here in the United States of America. Mainly that's what we'll get into. I don't think we're touching on anything else today. So without further ado, let's go ahead and begin. Now, I'm going to start kind of where I just mentioned, because I think it's super important and I think it's super useful. It tends to be a regular theme that when we think of giants, or giantism, right? I guess we call it. Really, we think of giants and we think of Nephilim. Like we think of hybrid creatures, right? Like that's the first thing that always comes to mind. And rightfully so to some degree, right? I mean, that's kind of the biggest problem I would say that the heavens and the earth have really had and shared together. But I want to talk a little bit today about some particular caveats, as you were. And I think that this will really help shape the topic around what we're going to get into, because we're going to see types of giantism that may surprise us. You maybe have already thought about this, or if you have thought about it a little bit, I think this will shed some light on and give some clarity around some of these ideas about giantism, about the nature of reality, of our current world and the ancient world. So, having said that, today I want to talk about the fact that, first of all, there are two types of giantism, which you may have guessed with my kind of discourse here. Diatribe, if you will. No. There's what I have labeled human gigantism, and there is hybrid or Nephilimic gigantism. Now, I do make mention of this because it's not only a very relevant topic for what we're getting into, but there's some clear distinctions, I think, about what people were like, how they were, what the nature of their lives were, and many other things as well. So I want to start kind of at the beginning, going back to the beginning, pre-flood era, before the deluge happened. At a bare minimum, I want to tell you guys that I am fully convinced that humans, just regular humans, were also way bigger pre-flood, pre-deluge. There's a lot of reasons to believe that. I mean, if you look at, for example, the Sumerian Kings list, and you see kind of how these people look, if you see supposedly Gilgamesh, who we would call Nimrod, more than likely, although we know he very seemingly became a Nephilim or a Gibberim, however you want to call that. He became hybridized, or some sort of strange thing happened there. But we see it really. I think in the old world, we see things are just larger in general. We can see this from a lot of stuff, frankly. Our bodies in the past, before the deluge, were more robust. And I think there's some real honest, not even speculation, but inquisitive minds, and even just kind of barely getting into the depth just a little bit when we're talking about even Genesis, right? Like the first few chapters, we see that clearly Adam and Eve had very different bodies than we did, right? They literally talked with God in the coolness of the afternoon. They shared and talked to heavenly beings. I mean, that's why we know the serpent. It was not weird for them to talk to the serpent. It was any other heavenly being, or type of creature. This is kind of a common thing. My point here is that wasn't weird. So it does make sense, even if you don't want to grant giantism, you would definitely, as a Christian, at the bare minimum, grant that our bodies were different before the fall, of course. And I would argue that continued on up to the deluge and really started to majorly decline in humans after that. Not completely, though, right? So, and I think we can see this also in types of animals that we no longer see, like mammoths and saber-toothed tigers and stuff like that. And this is actually a really well-documented phenomenon that in the past, animals were just larger. Fauna and flora were larger. I mean, you had larger plants. If we go to the native account, the Native Americans themselves, this was very normal. The body was more robust. It was larger. And we'll very soon see that tons of people talk about the natives being ginormous, which kind of is like, what? Are they Nephilim? Well, I don't think they were. I mean, at least not all of them. And we'll get into that. So Vine Deloria Jr., he is a Native American scholar who wrote a book called Red Earth, white lies, Native Americans, and the myth of scientific fact. It's a mouthful. He states that a lot of the elders of many different tribes actually report that Indians or Native Americans themselves were above average height. And in fact, some of the elders actually regularly report this in their traditions, or at least, in information that they hand down, or even if they're asked about it. So that's definitely something to take into account. There are numerous accounts, guys, by actually very credible witnesses. Some that are, I don't know if you guys have ever heard or read or watched any of this stuff, but it's kind of astonishing that there seems to be no record of this stuff, really. Not that it doesn't exist, but more that it's just been so unbelievably curated that it doesn't seem to exist. And so that's pretty wild. So yeah, really, frankly, very, very astonishing, just surprising, really. And so we can see some of these actual happenings that really kind of blow us away. And we can see that there's also a different type of gigantism, because the Indians themselves, the natives themselves, tend to discuss these things, that they were a problem for them. That is the non-native giants, we'll call them. Like I said, we have some really matter-of-fact accounts that are very surprising from people that you and I guys, we frankly know. If you're American, you kind of grew up with some of these names. John Smith, 1606. He met the I'm going to kill this name, guys. Susquehannocks. I'm sorry. In Chesapeake Bay, he met a Native American tribe. You guys know me. I'm very stickler on names, but geez, that is difficult to pronounce. He met people that were well-dressed natives along Chesapeake Bay, and they were huge, 8 feet tall. Women 7 some odd feet tall, just very normal, very, very normal. There were presidents that actually got to meet gigantic Indians, over 7 feet tall. One of the particular tribal leaders, one of the actual chiefs, met Thomas Jefferson when he was doing a land treaty, a land deal. He actually walked into and actually got to meet him, which was pretty phenomenal. Very cool. So yeah, tons of stuff like that, guys. Just tons of it. Other people have talked about some really phenomenal stuff as well, right? Like some of the Europeans, the Spaniards, when they came to the shores of the Americas, the U.S., what we would call now, they met a Duhari, that people called the Duhari. And in fact, there's some beliefs that these were actually Irishmen. They were an Irish clan, because actually the chief was painted, and then the name for their chief was a word that actually means painted in Irish, or in an older version of Irish. Weird stuff like that. So you definitely had giants roaming these lands. There were many accounts, and we're talking back, clear back in the 1500s. Like, we're not talking about recent history. We're talking about fairly early European contact with the landmass of America, of the United States. So very, very cool. There are many stories, as a matter of fact, where the elders, aside from mentioning that, that the older Indians, or the Indians of previous generations, were a much more noble, stronger, faster, more powerful race. But also, the evidence bears witness. There have been many times that many skeletons have been dug up, and they find them of these heights, 7, 8 feet, 9 feet, 10 feet tall. But I think a lot of the people that European settlers or explorers came upon in these earlier times were in the ballpark of 7 to 8 feet tall. Just very surprising. Very, very surprising. We do have some people that are 7. I don't think we have anyone that's 8 feet tall, but we do have some people that are over 7 feet tall. It's not very normal. It's not very common, but it does happen. This was pretty prolific. This was pretty ubiquitous. And even the shorter people, even like the women, were sometimes, on average 6.5 to 7 feet tall. It's huge for a woman. There are not many women that are that height. Again, they exist. But when it's so ubiquitous and it's so common amongst a people's group, you got to ask yourself, this seems to be kind of a natural phenomenon. And in my opinion, and from everything I've been able to read, this is actually the book I read. Totally recommend it, guys. Giants on Record, really great book by Jim Vieira and Hugh Newman, who is an Englishman. Really great book. Really, really cool. Tons of accounts of giant bones and giant encounters, and really great. So it really seems like, looking through this, I mean, I was shocked to find out just how ubiquitous giants were in this country. It is wild. And we also, I think that we think of gigantism the same way we maybe I should say, it seems like we hold a double standard. It was actually, this is kind of a funny anecdote. I was watching a Blurry Creatures episode with Ninjas or Butterflies today, and really great, really great. I love listening to those guys. I don't often listen to podcasts anymore, just because I'm usually reading books or I'm researching or whatever. Music is kind of the same way. It's just a background thing for me nowadays. Didn't used to be that. I used to be a total musician all the time, but that's changed because I've been researching. And when they were talking, they were talking about how UFOs don't necessarily have to be bad, because they've had instances where people say that the UFO saved them or something happened like that. And I think it's a fair point, and I'll tell y'all why. Because when we see phenomenon, it's not always evil. It doesn't always do something negative to us. And in fact, there are instances. There's one particular instance that I can think of. Saiditan. I can't remember his first name right now. Man, great researcher. I forget his name. Good night. I can't remember. I can't believe I can't remember his first name. He did a documentary way back when, back in 2000, I think, called Angels and Demons or UFOs, something like that. Anyway, I'll post his information in the show notes, because it's totally worth watching. He really breaks down the fact that, what if not all UFOs are bad guys? What if this is like a war that's going on? And there's a whole conversation to be had about that. The point is, the reason I got into this is because they make that mention. Stuff like this can very likely be heavenly technology. And I thought it was kind of ironic that Christians nowadays say, well, technology is not bad. It's just how we use it. And I'm like, yeah, that's true. I agree with that statement. But then they won't also pass it on to other things as well. It's like, if it's heavenly technology, well, that's just too weird. So it's all bad. Well, no, I mean, use the same standard that you're talking about. Is it the nature of reality that God has made these things and maybe we just misunderstand their representation or their use? You can decide that for yourself. That's not something I'll decide for you. I would argue that is exactly the case, that God has made these things and they get used in ways that can be appropriate or inappropriate, that can be helpful or harmful, so on and so forth. And so the reason I mention that anecdote is because I think that gigantism is the same thing. And I had personally, until I started reading these accounts, not given it really a whole lot of thought. I know we talk about Noah was a giant. We talk about Adam was a giant. We talk about probably Methuselah was a giant, stuff like that. I mean, that, giant in terms of how tall and big and robust and, just kind of really fortified they were. But I don't think we really give a second thought a lot of times to exactly what that means, right? How that plays out. And so I think when we see accounts like this, it kind of throws us off a bit, because we have a certain concept or worldview of what giants are. And it's Nephilim. And that's not always right. I get it. There are a lot of negative accounts and histories and myths about giants. So it is fair. But I would also say that I just think that we misunderstand the original plan or design that God had, is that we were very different. And I think that glory that we had, gigantism, if we want to call it that, being part of it, I would argue it was probably normalcy, and we've just shrunk. Maybe that's a better way to say it. So we want to make sure that we make that distinction between gigantism that is human and gigantism that is hybrid in nature. Now, Nephilimic or hybrid gigantism is a phenomenon that occurs, obviously, which we're a lot more accustomed to hear about, the nature of angelic hyperdimensionality. And I'll break that down in a second, why I'm phrasing it as the nature of angelic hyperdimensionality, the cross of human and Elohim. That's just the easiest way to word it. But before I do get there, I just want it to be clear that a lot of these tribes, when they would have their tallest people or their largest people, I guess is a better way to say it, and I'm talking about Native Americans here, a lot of them would marry into certain bloodlines or stay within certain bloodlines so that they could preserve that gigantism or that, what will we call it, kind of gloriousness. I think that they were trying to preserve the glories of old, for better or for worse, however you want to take that. But it was very interesting. It's a very interesting thing. I personally think it makes a lot of sense. I don't think it's that weird. I'm also not saying no Indian ever had relations with some sort of divine being or partially divine being. I think that all of this stuff is very messy. It's not monolithic. And like all stuff, right, there's usually more than one answer that is true. You can have truth be simultaneously many things and still be the same truth. And I'm not talking about a relativistic truth. I'm talking about that there's different aspects of how truth itself works. We've talked about this many times. Anyway, I just want to make mention of that before I move on. Now we get to the Nephilimic gigantism, which is a phenomenon that occurs, again, between the nature of humans and the first, I would say that probably the origins of all this would be what we call the Nephilim, which is the sons of God, males, so to speak, right? And females of human non-divine nature, just regular human women that gave birth to the Nephilim. That is hybrid gigantism, Nephilimic gigantism. Now, what's up, Ricky, with this hyperdimensionality? Okay, let's talk about this for a second. And I love this particular topic because it's very helpful. I got this information, and I'm giving it to you from a book that I very much love called Revising Reality. Josh Peck is one of the authors. I can't remember offhand who else is in that book. There's a gentleman who has a Japanese name, and I can't remember him either. There's several authors of that book, and that book was really monumental and groundbreaking for me because it helped really give shape to a lot of aspects of reality itself instead of focusing, we tend to kind of focus on one little like creature or one little aspect, but I'm one of those guys that I really want to understand why God made things the way he did, like the big picture of stuff like that. So that book was monumental for me because it got into a lot of those topics. One of those topics in that glorious book, which I totally recommend you guys pick up. So in that book, Revising Reality, one of the most excellent things that I found is kind of a topic on the Nephilim, how they're giant, why they're giant, all that. And this really, frankly, makes a lot of sense to me. And the book is actually drawing on ideas from a book called, I think it's called 2D Land. And in that book, well, let's lay out just simply the topic itself, okay? So in 2D land, you and I are in 3D land, right? Because we have 3 dimensions, and technically we're in a 4th dimension, which is time, which I'm spending right now with you guys. In that 3rd dimension, though, which is more of a commonality for us, we have depth, width, and height, right? So we have 3 aspects, but on a 2D plane, you literally only have height and length. That's it. So you only have those 2 dimensions. So it's length and height, right? Okay. So what would happen if a 2-dimensional character comes into our 3-dimensional world? Well, we already know the answer to that, right? The answer is that it's a sheet of paper, basically, right? It's very thin. It can go up and down. It has, some sort of height, and it has some sort of length to it, but there is no width to it, which is that 3rd dimension. And so literally we just have a sliver, right? If we look at it dead on, it looks like nothing really, because it's just a sliver. And we can only see it if it's flipped sideways. Now, let's do the inverse. What would it look like if we were to go into the 3D world? Let's just keep it simple, right? We don't want to make this too complicated. Let's just say I take my finger, okay? And I put my finger into 2D world or 2D land, right? Now, when I do that, what is the denizen of 2D land going to see? Glad you asked. The denizen of the 2D world is only going to see a circle. And let's just, for the sake of exploring this idea a little more, if I run my finger more and more through 2D land, what are they going to see? Well, it's going to look like my finger is growing. And then it's going to look like, if I keep going my whole hand, right, it's going to look like all sorts of weird shapes coming through. Then you're going to get to my wrist. It's going to be a bigger circle. And on top of that, what are you going to see? Well, you're going to see my flesh. You're going to see my bone. You're going to see my blood vessels. You're going to see all that stuff. You're going to see all that stuff in 2D world, but just as a sliver, because there is no width, right? There's nowhere to put it. Now, what if we were to put our whole self, 3D selves, into 2D land? Glad you asked. If you and I were to go into 2D land, coming from 3D land, which is where we live and occupy, we would have nowhere else to go, guys, except lengthwise out and height up. Well, that sounds awfully familiar, doesn't it? Sort of sounds like we would be giants in 2D land. That, my lovely dark web theologians, is exactly what happens with the Nephilim when they are birthed here on this earth. They don't have anywhere else to grow except out, up, and lengthwise. Their girth is huge, as their bodies, their bodies themselves have huge girth. They're just massive. And also, they're extremely tall. They have to, they're proportional beings in the hyperdimensions that their parents exist in, at least their dads, right? So that hyperdimensionality has to translate some other ways. Well, how does that happen? Gigantism. Where else are they going to grow? Is it stunted a bit because they mated with humans? Certainly. And I would argue there are many other aspects to gigantism, right? That Nephilimic gigantism that are included there. And I would, we could get into all that, but that, there would be supernatural stuff involved. And in any case, not to bore you guys with details. Actually, if you're listening to this, you're probably really enjoying it. But really, I don't want to rabbit hole on that. What I want to say is that is the only way we can think about how giants are giants. Why are they giants? Well, they're giants because they don't have anywhere else to grow. Pretty wild, right? Yeah, I thought so too the first time I heard it. Okay, so now we really have kind of gotten this out of the way about these two concepts about human gigantism and hybrid gigantism. Is there interplay? Is there crossbreeding? Terrible pun, I know. Yes, absolutely. All those things, I'm sure, undoubtedly happen. But there are some other things here that we do need to explore. So let's move on to this a little bit. We've talked about the fact that giantism in humans was much more common in the old world than it is in our post-Diluvian world. And I think that that's, again, degraded more and more, right? Again, we can see examples of this with things like, what's the name of that? It's supposed to be a tree stump. Is it Devil's Tower? I want to say it's Devil's Tower is what it's called. That it's that, the national monument that looks like a giant tree stump. Among many others, there are many others as well. I'm mentioning that one, but that's the one that really comes to mind. Rock formations that actually look like gigantic people or things. I'm sure you guys have seen this stuff. Some people make the assertion or the supposition, right, that the Himalayas are, the salt is actually leftover organs or vessels from the body or whatever, right? From these Nephilim. Could be. I'm not gonna say no or yeah. I mean, I have no idea. Is it possible? I'm sure it's possible. Why wouldn't it be possible? Anything's possible. Um, I think a lot of the arguments that we have is that we don't believe in the supernatural. And then when we say we believe in the supernatural, we think it's all kooky. And so we're in this constant mess, right? I think that that's very likely. And I think we also see traces of just giant animals, giant vegetation and stuff like that. Like that stuff exists, right? It's all petrified. We've been able to find it. So that's definitely a thing. Now, it is important here. I kind of want to get into this just because I think it's useful for our conversation that megafauna tends to be more common in colder conditions, post ice age for sure, but definitely colder conditions. And we know this to be true for two reasons. So this kind of gets into just scientifically, but biologically, on a base or just a base level, when it comes to biology, there's actually some proponents or some contributing factors to gigantism that I think we often tend to miss. So one of those is the stimulation of the hypothalamus gland and growth hormones by excess of CO2. So in the pre-diluvian world, especially in higher climates, right, in higher altitudes as well, in higher latitudes is what I meant to say. Higher and lower, that is the extremes. Obviously, you get much colder atmosphere, much more cold atmospheres, and you tend to get a lot more rocky or higher elevation areas as well, right? Because there's nowhere really to there's nothing to grow there, and so just kind of is rock formation or ice formations. This actually is really interesting because it actually promotes over hundreds of years, you might have an inch growth in average height growth within people groups. But the peoples that stay in colder climates tend to be taller. That's very interesting. I could think of a million things about the cold that would kind of lend it themselves naturally to think, wow, that's really not that weird. Not only does it stimulate your hypothalamus gland, but I mean, just living in the cold anyway, you have to be kind of a rough person, right? Like you have to really, I mean, we're pampered here, but a lot of the people that grew up in the cold, they would just fight through it, man. It's just kind of the way it is. And in places like Boston and Chicago where it gets super freaking cold, if you're listening from there, very well. Up in Canada, we have some Canadian listeners. Sorry, don't hate my terrible Canadian accent. Fake Canadian accent. It gets really cold. You just have tougher people. That's just kind of the way it is. But this also has to do with a higher concentration of the magnetic field and energy itself, stimulating cell growth. So you have both of these things going on. So when you got more CO2, which is a lack of oxygen, right? You have a higher concentration of CO2 in the air. That tends to lend itself to growth through the hypothalamus gland. But then you also have the vegetation and concentration of things growing through the magnetic field and that stimulation of the cell growth. So you got two of those things just from a scientific perspective that actually make these very realistic and very not only plausible and very possible, but actually part of this. And this is actually drawing directly from the book. There were a pair of scientists that actually did this research and found that is exactly the case. That this kind of gigantism does happen. It's called Bergman's rule. So check it out if you're interested. You're curious about that. That in and of itself, just time frames of growth of people or growth of biological matter, should give us room for pause. I don't know about you guys. I'm sure everybody has a different view on this. Shelley is very ardently young Earth creation. I am not. I tend to believe that humanity itself is certainly, history that we have, and certainly recorded history, but our history is certainly a lot shorter than the God's history, than heavenly divine beings' history. That's my opinion. That may not be yours, but I think it when we see stuff like this, right, these kind of growth tendencies or how certain people are taller, I think it can, at a bare minimum, cause us to ask, well, what's going on here? Like, what is actually happening as far as growth is concerned, right? How old is the Earth? How much has the Earth changed and evolved? Like that double usage, that synonym there. So I think that's really important to think about as well. Also, it is really interesting. I wanted to mention this. This is really cool. I can't remember which tribe it was, but one of the tribes actually says that giant beasts like the mammoths and mastodons and saber-toothed tigers, all those things that, no longer exist, that are extinct, were present. They seem to have been kind of removed from North America. And the one indigenous group in particular, whose tribe I'm not going to remember which it is at this moment, actually said that they believed that it was the Great Spirit that was saving them, was delivering them. This was really curious to me. I was like, oh, that's really cool. I was like, isn't that a biblical thing? Isn't there something biblical about that? There's something similar that's biblical when the enemies of Israel in the Old Covenant, that is the Old Testament, are trying to move into the land. God says that he's going to drive out the enemies of Israel. And a lot of these are obviously giants as well, right? If not all. No, not all, but most of them were giants. It says in Exodus 23:29, and verbatim text says, God is speaking, says, I will not drive them out before you in 1 year. He's talking about their enemies. Lest the land become desolate and the wild beasts multiply against you. Little by little, I will drive them out from before you until you have increased and possess the land. And that really got me thinking, man. I was like, wow, that's really cool. You guys may know we've done one episode about natives, about the Hopi and the Dene, which I can't remember their English expression for that tribe off the top of my head. We've talked about them and some other kind of in their interaction with giants. And so this is really getting a lot deeper into all that. But Shelley and I both tend to believe that a lot of natives actually communed with God himself, with Yahweh, but didn't really have all the pieces that we have for whatever reason, right? They did not, and they ended up here and without that information. I think that's also, goodness, that's a whole slew of episodes and ideas. It's a book's worth, but it's not a cut and dry thing. And I do think that a lot of them actually were talking to God. I genuinely do believe that. So anyway, just wanted to mention that. And, as time has gone on, this thing has just been naturally decreasing. You've seen the natives get shorter and shorter, smaller and smaller. But I literally, not even 2 weeks ago, I think it was last week on Joe Rogan, I literally just saw a guy, I think he's an MMA fighter. I'm not sure exactly what he was. It was just a super short clip. But he said that he had gone to one of these remote areas where indigenous peoples still have, their own lands and everything, and they're isolated from the rest of the normal modern, what we would now call the normal modern United States. And he ran into a kid that was 8 feet tall. And then he looked up at him, literally towering as a giant. He said, oh, you should see my dad. And his dad was like 8'7" or something. I mean, and this guy was huge. He's 6'4", the guy that's telling Joe Rogan about this. I mean, imagine that. That's crazy. So anyway, this stuff certainly is ubiquitous. And we definitely saw it throughout the old world. And there's still traces of it. So much so that, I kind of want to give you guys a picture of what the indigenous, a little bit more of a picture of what the indigenous themselves say about these things. We see these smaller giants nowadays, right? Human giants. But I think that, again, I don't think it's that monolith that we're always looking for. Some indigenous tribes actually say that they descend from giant or divine beings, which is always very interesting. Actually, we see a lot of tribes throughout the world, right? A lot of tribal people say that they are from the star people, right? That they're descendants from the stars. But it's interesting, this particular account, whose tribe I'm not going to have on hand, just because there are so many tribes in North America, guys. The United States is a humongous landmass. So they say that these divinely endowed beings were actually lost the mastery of their power through disgrace of earth and sky and became rapidly plain mortals. I'm just telling you what the account says. That's very interesting. Some people say that some of these giants lost their minds and, they rolled around in the dirt and kind of went crazy and interesting stuff, man. Interesting. Now, I do want to tell you guys that most of the natives that say that they arrived there, really they showed up and that these giants were from before them. Okay, so that gives us a little bit of perspective, right? We've already talked about human giantism, and now we're talking about hybrid giantism or some other race in general. But it would seem to signal a whole different kind of style of giant because these tend to be white skinned, very fair skinned, and a lot of times black hair and black beards, which if you guys know anything about Native Americans, they were not superly famous for growing huge beards. So that definitely kind of signals at least a different people's group if you're not, believing in the supernatural. I tend to believe these were the hybrids that fled from other parts of the world or procreated in this further in this part of the world, or however you want to see it. Or maybe it was just ubiquitous and this kind of thing was just happening all over the place at this point. It's interesting because they make lots of mentions, and I'll give you guys a few of the stories, right, about different people's what they say. There are accounts of all sorts of stuff, and I'm going to have kind of a narrative for you guys here for a few of these that are really interesting. One of these is the stony giants or the stonish giants. The Iroquois talk about them. This is near the Ohio River Valley. We get also, who are the other ones that also talk about this? I think it's largely a lot of these accounts come from the Iroquois who are from that area, which is farther north where it's colder, right? Makes a lot of sense. And that these giants came to inhabit or populate these areas and were just fierce. Now, it's important to mention some of the characteristics of these giants, okay? They tended to have double rows of teeth. Now, I don't recall hearing anything that the natives said that they did or did not have double rows of teeth, but it is something very distinctive that human settlers from Europe and explorers, whenever, especially settlers, right, because they were digging these places up, when they would dig these graves up or they would dig these bones up, they would make mention of double rows of teeth. And this is, you want to talk about something ubiquitous? I don't think I've heard anything more common than the fact, obviously, that they're giants, right, is the double rows of teeth, just over and over and over. And they always say that they could put the whole jaw over their face, which is crazy. It's so wild to think about. And that really gets into the whole aspect that we talked about earlier about how really we could see that there was this this proportionality to the giants, right? When you think about people like I forget the guy's name. He's on the Spurs, a tall basketball player. I can't even pronounce his name anyway. And I think he's French, I think. Don't quote me on that. Anyway, he's really tall. He's 7'3". But if you look at him, he's not proportional. Like, he's just super tall and lanky. In fact, so much so that they call him the alien, right? Just kind of the way he looks is kind of curious. It's kind of goofy. I'm sorry, tall basketball player, but you get the idea. Let me look and see if I can find his name here for a second. You guys can see a picture. I'll put him up here on screen. Tall. I think he's 7'3", actually. Basket. Anyway, there is a Spurs player that is really tall like that. And I'll put him on screen. You guys can see him. So we do get this kind of thing, but it's rarely with proportionality. Although there are cases, certainly, where people are larger and they're a little bit more proportional. But I do think it's very telling that these all kind of seem to point to the same proportionality aspect. Now, back to these stonish giants. Okay. So the Iroquois say that they literally had impenetrable skin. They would shoot arrows, and the arrows would just bounce off of them and fall on the ground, and they couldn't kill them. They had these huge jaw lines, right, like I mentioned to you guys, with these double rows of teeth. And there's been a lot of speculation about that whole double rows of teeth thing. Some people, it tends to be kind of the idea that, like, it seems like the other rows of teeth were like coming in as the other ones were falling out. It's kind of a weird situation, but they at least looked like double rows of teeth as a bare minimum, which I'm not inclined to believe otherwise. I know that the guys in this book actually took because they're the ones that did American Giants. There was a series on this, and they took it to a forensic specialist to check on these bones, as forensic dental specialist. And, she was like, she didn't really confirm that was the case, but I mean, as much of modern science tends to confirm kind of stuff, but she did say it was, how common because that can be a condition as well, right? You can have supernumerary amounts of teeth, or supernumerary sets of teeth, but it's very rare, and it's very sporadic. It doesn't tend to be uniform, and it doesn't tend to look normal. It doesn't tend to look like it's automatically or naturally integrated, and that seems to be the case with these giants. They had double rows that were integral to their whole body, their whole system, and everything. So really, really interesting. What else? What else was I going to say? So the jaws fit over them. They're humongous in stature. They seem to be proportional. So let's talk about some of these invasions, like I just mentioned. So we have those Stonish giants again, where they couldn't penetrate their skin when they were trying to attack them. Not only that, I mentioned the teeth again because they were cannibals, and that was a distinctive quality of these types of giants. And I think that tends to be actually one of the distinctive features from the Native Americans, is that these were cannibals. I mean, largely cannibals. There are many stories that we have like this, where they would just eat people relentlessly. In fact, there's actually one story where I want to say it's the Lovelock Cave red-haired giants. I don't know if you guys have ever heard this. This is a very famous, very, very famous story. I won't spoil too much, just give you guys some highlights. And actually, here in a second, I'll have a short clip for you guys to listen to and watch. Listen to and or watch, whichever you're doing at the moment. And it talks about the Lovelock Caves, where there was red-haired giants, right? And they were just torturing these Native Americans, who themselves were very likely very tall to begin with. So again, we get this giantism idea, natural versus unnatural. And they would just eat people. Like when they would fight these people, they would kill them, and they would eat them. If they were buried, they would go and dig up their dead, and they would eat them too. If their own kind fell in battle, the women, because these women would be on the sidelines of this battle, they would go and scoop up these bodies, and they would later eat them. It's pretty wild, man. And so they would eat their own tribesmen. They would eat these other tribes as well. This is the Paiute people, by the way, who long fought the giants, and just pretty wild stuff, man. Pretty wild stuff. This is in Arizona, which actually tends to be a little bit weird, right? We don't usually see a whole lot of stuff in the Northwest, or not nearly as much in the Northwest as there is. It's far more ubiquitous towards the northeastern part of the United States, where we see a lot of gigantism. I think that has to do just with the more barren landscape that's out here where we're at. I'm in a kind of a greener zone here in Austin, but you go not even 2 or 3 hours west of me, and you're going to hit desert, just pure desert. So that does make sense, to some degree. Anyway, they end up really, they have to kill these people, kill these giants, these what I would call hybrid giants, these red-haired giants. They have to kill them, and so much so that the actual one of the women that amongst her family, from father to son, was passed down a lock of this red hair. She actually ended up coming into this red hair and integrating it into one of her ceremonial dresses, which is crazy cool. And well, let me go ahead and put that on for you guys now, so you can hear about the Lovelock giants.
The Sitaka, the red-haired cannibals of Humboldt Lake centuries ago. Along the Humboldt River, in what is now Nevada, the Paiute people faced a terrifying enemy, a small tribe known as the Sitaka. By night, they ambushed travelers and dug deep pit traps and trails, waiting for unsuspecting victims to fall in. And according to Paiute oral tradition, they didn't just kill, they ate their victims. They even dug up the freshly buried dead to feast on them. War finally broke out, and it raged for 3 brutal years. The Paiute say the Sitaka fought fiercely, even leaping into the air to catch incoming arrows and fire them right back. But in the end, the Paiute drove them from the land, burning the brush where they tried to hide. The survivors fled onto Humboldt Lake itself, building boats out of bulrush reeds, drifting on the water, slowly starving without fire to keep them alive. One by one, as they came ashore, desperate for water, the Paiute picked them off. Finally, the last survivors retreated into a cave near the mountains and refused to come out. The Paiute gave them one final chance: surrender, abandon their ways, stop eating people like coyotes or beasts. Silence was the only answer. So the Paiute gathered wood, piled it at the cave's entrance, and lit it ablaze, calling out one last warning as the flames rose. Still nothing. 10 days later, they returned to check. There was no need to go inside. The smell told them everything. The story didn't end there. It was passed down for generations, and remarkably, it came with physical evidence. Paiute lecturer Sarah Winmucker Hopkins claimed her family still possessed a lock of the Sitaka's distinctive reddish hair, passed down father to son for generations, sewn into a ceremonial mourning dress worn only by her family. Then, in 1904, 22 years after she first told this story to the world, something extraordinary happened. An excavation in that very same area reportedly unearthed a skeleton. Reports described it as 11 feet tall.
So it's pretty wild, right? I mean, that's pretty crazy to hear that. I mean, they were just relentlessly were cannibals. They would not renounce their ways. And in fact, what wasn't even mentioned there is that they actually tried to settle them multiple times. They tried to integrate them into their tribe, but they refused. They refused. And so, their deaths ensued. Let's go ahead and continue on a little bit. There is some mentions of the Sandusky, the Tawa, and the Chippewa tribes of the Ohio by Lake Erie, that whole area. Those people say that the whole country was first occupied by a tribe of black-bearded race, that they were not the first ones there, that is to say, and that they were very large in size. And then thereafter, a red-bearded race, or tribe, whatever you want to call it, came in, killed them off, or ran them off. So we know that there were, what would we call it? Prehistoric American giant wars, Nephilim giant wars, or hybrid giant wars. That's crazy, dude. Let me know in the comments if you would like me to do an episode on that. I probably will anyway, but if you're interested, let me know. Tell me what you think. So that's really cool. Now, we've gotten into the Paiute Indians a little bit. We tend to hear stuff like, that people live longer in general. So that was another aspect. Even just the Native Americans themselves, there was one of the elders said they had said that one of the elders had lived up to 200 years. Now, I know that people are going to automatically, the Christians are going to, their ears and their minds are going to freak out and be like, wait, how did he live that long? If God said he was going to cut the years to 120 years back in Genesis, before the flood, he said that he was going to do that. There are some interesting interpretations there. Go look into that. There are some understandings that that's not exactly what that means. Actually means that there was 120 years that God would wait before he did the flood. But anyway, in any case, I mean, we obviously know that God did shorten lifespans, and we see that. That's not that weird. But yeah, that kind of thing did happen. What are some other aspects about these giants? We've talked about cannibalism. We've talked about double rows of teeth, huge craniums. People said a lot of times you'll hear several accounts all over the place where they could just literally put the head over their head, which is crazy. I'm trying to think if there's any other aspects that we need to cover as far as physical, anatomical types of things. We see all sorts of people. Really, I think that we get lots of different hybridism and different supernatural. I mean, we might even call some of these guys cryptids. So there is a group of people called, I can't remember which tribe it was, but they call them the moon-eyed people. They call them that because they have slits, like eyes that are slits, and they can't see very well in the light, and so they would have to come out at night. And they would sometimes help the tribes at night, but they would sometimes also hunt them. Some people believe that because they were really hairy as well. Some people think this was a Sasquatch. It could be. I mean, it really could be. Oh, we see some other wild stuff, right? That we see some of these skulls are actually horned skulls with horns back behind the ears. Now, that can be a medical condition as well, but some of these are just super long. We see elongated skulls. Some of these formations are natural. Some of them are not, right? We know that the flatheads in Montana, I want to say, did do this. This is a practice of that they would shape the head of their children. But I mean, you have other cases where that's not the case at all. I mean, that these people were literally they were born this way. Skulls are super thick. The bone density of these giants, just super thick. We even have an account in 1879 of Buffalo Bill finding a giant bone, a thigh bone of a human. He said it was 3 times the normal size of a human. So that's probably about let's just give a low estimate and say the person was like 5'2", 5'5", right? We're still looking at like 16 feet tall if that thigh bone is 3 times the size. And Buffalo Bill actually, when they found this, he asked the local natives, well, where did this come from? Like, what is this? And the natives were like, oh, that's from a race that's long gone. They no longer are here. And Buffalo Bill wanted to take it with him, but they literally had no way to take it because it was so huge. So he just left it there. That's crazy, yo. That's really crazy. So we see this pretty regularly, right? Double rows of teeth, giant heads. In fact, actually, there's a portion of the Babylonian Talmud that actually talks about supernumerary rows of teeth before the Great Deluge. Take that for what it's worth. But yeah, very, very interesting. I could go on and on about some of this stuff. There is one account, I guess you guys are wondering like how tall these individuals were. A lot of the accounts were 7 to 8 feet, but there are some that are, and I think that these are probably more ancient creatures too, right? That were surviving longer. We have some that were 10 to 11 feet in Shenandoah Springs. This was a finding in 1833. We have in a 13-footer in 1870 found by Mr. Stanley digging up a barn, unearthed a 13-foot skeleton with a 32.5 inch skull circumference, which is crazy. He actually sold it at an auction. I think he sold it to the Smithsonian for $10,000, which is in today's money about $255,000. Wild. I mean, that's a brand new house. You find a skeleton like that. We had 10 to 15 footers in Whitewater, Ohio. The previous one was in, I think, Manchester, Ohio. There were 4 to 5 skeletons found in Whitewater, Ohio, ranging from 10 to 15 feet. They said that one of the skeleton's skulls actually was 1/4 of an inch thick. That's insanely thick. I should also mention, I know we're talking about giants, but there are also some legends, not as many, of pygmies, which are tiny people. And these were 3 to 4 feet tall. And they had some of these had long tails and horns. That's pretty wild. There This was a 1905 finding in Sulphur Springs, Idaho. But there is one that I want to mention to you guys. I'm not going to remember the entire story around it right now, but definitely it just stuck with me. The biggest one that we find in this book is an 18-foot giant. That is just massive. Now, I kind of started thinking about this. This is in West Hickory, Pennsylvania. And this was found in 1870 as well. This kind of time period is very normal for people to be finding this kind of stuff. And I'm mentioning it because in the next episode, I'm actually going to be talking about the Smithsonian, where these bones went, why we don't find them, what the cover-up is about. And you may have heard this stuff already, so you may know it, but you might find it very interesting nonetheless. I think it's super fascinating. But this particular 18-footer was actually found with a metal corroded helmet and with a 9-foot light sword. 18-footer. Okay. Let's put this into perspective, okay? In my downstairs living area are 10-foot vaulted ceilings. This sword, by just under a foot, would touch the top of my ceiling downstairs. That's insane. That is insane. To give you guys an idea, my house, I have a 2-story house. This house, these are what? These are 6-foot, or no, these are 8-foot ceilings, and my downstairs are 10-foot vaulted ceilings. So my house is probably all the way to the tippy top, about 25, not even 25 feet, maybe, let's just say like 22 feet. We'll even give it 25. That's fine. Literally from where I'm at, right now I'm recording upstairs because downstairs is just my living area. If this giant came up to my window, I mean, he would literally be able to peek in my window from where I'm sitting. 18 feet is insanely tall. Now, of course, he'd probably be so massive that he'd be crushing most of the lawn. So I can't even imagine just how girthy, like how massive that guy would be. But I think about that a lot. I think about it a whole lot. It's really crazy. And this kind of skeleton was being unearthed here in the United States in the 1800s, 1900s, 1600s, 1500s, more in the 1600s forward, 1700s, because this is when the Europeans had started to settle this land. And so we started to see this a little bit more commonly. There's even a story of George Washington actually unearthing the bones of a giant Indian. So this stuff is pretty crazy. So we kind of see all these physical attributes really all over the place here. And I wanted to share that with you guys because I think it's cool to think about how they were. It's pretty wild to think about what they were like physically, like what they were like. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about something else as well. I want to mention to you guys there are 2 other videos that I'm going to put on real quick here. One is from a giant called Pasakonewe. I don't know how to pronounce his name. I'm sorry. Unfortunately, I don't know that one. But he was a 7-foot tall shaman, and he became the chief of chiefs. He was actually trying to unite the Mohawk peoples all together and stop war. He was a peacemaker. And there's a really cool account of him. He was a pretty wild guy. And actually, let's go and watch that now so you can hear about him because he had some pretty wild supernatural abilities. Let's check it out.
The Great Peacemaker, Pasakonewe. In the 1600s, New England colonists told stories of a man who stood 7 feet tall, Pasakonewe. Unlike most giants of legend, he wasn't just myth. He was seen and recorded by the very settlers who watched him walk among them. A powerful shaman of the Pennacook people, Pasakonewe rose from Sachem to Bashaba, chief of chiefs. Uniting tribes against the aggressive Mohawk nation, he lived an extraordinarily long life, said to be 120 years, moving freely between native and colonial worlds. Both revered him, both feared him. It's easy to see why. Legend says he could make water burn, make trees and rocks dance, breathe green life back into dead leaves, and turn a snake's dried skin back into a living snake. His greatest power may have been over the sky. When settlers came to arrest him, he called down a storm instead of running. wind and rain throwing the world into chaos long enough for him to vanish into the forest. Even death didn't end the legend. At his burial, a witness described a bright light rising from his body, ascending over Mount Washington, believed to be the earthly home of the Great Spirit. Passaconaway's home was Lowell, Massachusetts, where two strange structures still stand. A stone circle and a mysterious beehive chamber sitting on land that bordered a Pennacook reservation just 20 years before his death. Did his own people build them?
Isn't that wild? I mean, he could control the elements and the weather. And now you might ask yourself, okay, well, dude, that's totally demonic. And that's, I can't say that you're wrong necessarily. I also don't know the answer to some of these questions. They're fascinating questions, right? Because you have white European settlers that are coming into a people's land that does not belong to them. And granted, a lot of these people say that it was not their land first, that there were other giants here on this land first, which totally valid. At least they're honest about that. So take that for what it's worth, certainly, right? But they had certainly been settled there for hundreds of years, centuries. It's a long, long time to be in a place. And they talk about their ancestors having settled here many, many centuries before them. So I think that we'd be remiss if we don't recognize them as somewhat native to this land, if not completely native to this land, depending on the tribe, depending on the people, depending on, there's migration, all sorts of stuff. But they certainly have been here for a very, very long time. I am mentioning that because I don't want to skip over the fact that, that they control the elements and stuff like that. And I told you guys that I think a lot of these tribes people would commune with Yahweh. And I still believe that. But it is a fair question. Like, what's going on? Why is it like this? How did this happen? I don't necessarily have the answers. I think that we're coming into a clash where there's an old world and a new world. And sometimes you might ask, was God himself giving grace? Were these malevolent spirits stirring up more strife? I mean, it's very complicated because a lot of times when you have settlers, they betray or cheat people, steal their land, or there's misunderstandings about what the land actually is and how it's owned. And I mean, this is actually a really good conversation to be had around what land itself means, like if there's any inherent meaning to the land. And I mean, you probably know me if you've ever listened to my podcast before. Both Shelley and I are very adamant. I'm super adamant, probably more, about the fact that land really does have legal ownership. And because it does, and actually we see this in the Bible, we totally see this in the Bible. It's not weird, but we make it weird because, colonialism and all these things have kind of settled the modern world. But I think that there are still definitely land disputes. I'm going to put you guys on to a particular interesting account. Some of these natives say that the giants were already here. Others say that they actually had to ask them permission to settle. Others say that they came and pushed them out and actually took over the high places and built their cities there. But the hybrids, again, were almost always violent and cannibalistic. I'm calling them hybrids because that's my view of this. You may view this differently, but I would think that it tends to actually make sense. There's just a total disregard for human life by these, what I would call hybrid giants. And I think we see that when you go and dig up the dead to eat them is pretty gross. I mean, it's pretty dark. Now, I do want to put one more video in here that I think is worth mentioning. There was a really cool account that is given by a white guy by the name of Nelson Lee. And Nelson was actually captured by the Comanche. And the Comanche, if you know anything about the Comanche were pretty violent. They were a violent group. And they were not, they didn't put up with anything. And so if you were found on their land, is this where some of the famous scalping comes from, where they just, murder you and scalp you and all sorts of stuff like that, doing it live while you're still alive. Brutal people. But they captured this guy. They did not kill him. He actually warmed up to the tribe and married into the tribe as well. And they have a really interesting account of their version or their understanding of the white race. I'm going to let you guys listen in and tell me what you think. Check this out.
In 1859, a former Texas Ranger named Nelson Lee published an extraordinary account of his years living among the Comanche, first as a prisoner, later as something closer to family. He came to respect his captors, married a woman from the tribe, and learned their oldest stories firsthand. Among them was a legend passed down through countless generations, the tale of a race of white giants who once ruled the land. These giants, the Comanche told him, stood 10 feet tall, far richer and more powerful than any people living today. They built fortresses on the summits of mountains, guarding great cities that filled the valleys below. In craftsmanship and in war, nothing before or since could compare to them. Next to these giants, the storytellers said, even modern men looked like pygmies, small in both skill and strength. But their power came at a cost. The giants drove the original people from their homes by the sword, seizing land that had belonged to others since the beginning of the world. They ruled with a high and haughty hand, and as their dominion grew, so did their arrogance. They forgot justice. They forgot mercy. They grew proud and forgot the Great Spirit entirely. So the Great Spirit came down. Fire and flood swept the giants from the face of the earth, leaving nothing behind but ruin. The strange mounds scattered across the high plains, the crumbling stone the Comanche still walked among. These were all that remained of the giants' fortresses and their once mighty cities. The storyteller, known as Rolling Thunder, didn't end the legend there. He turned it into a warning. The same fate, he said, awaited the white settlers now sweeping across the continent, driving the Indians from their land just as the giants once had. Grown arrogant in their strength, forgetting God, they too would one day be swept from existence. For the Great Spirit was just, Rolling Thunder said, and as surely as rivers flow to the sea, the land would one day be restored to its rightful people.
And there you have it. Pretty cool, right? We have stories like this where God wipes out the giants. And I mean, where have you seen that? That's the deluge, right? But I was blown away at the fact that the Comanches saw the white settlers as like a repeat in their mind. Like that's some crazy dramatic trauma to associate white settlers with ancient races of white giants that would cannibalize and destroy their people. It makes you wonder, man. It really kind of puts stuff into perspective. If that was the understanding of the white man, then yeah, you can kind of see why there was so much tension there, right? That's not to paint the Comanche as innocent people or any other tribe necessarily as totally innocent people. People are people. We all make mistakes. We all do things wrong. Sin is still sin. I mean, I'm not arguing any of those points, but I am arguing that as a people group or as a generation, stuff like that has an effect, and it has a profound effect. So we do see a lot of these stories where the Great Spirit will wipe out the giants. There's even an account I remember of one where the giants don't believe in the Great Spirit and they mock the Great Spirit. And I thought that was very fascinating. And the Great Spirit wipes them. Some are of the Great Spirit or a coyote like coming and descending, turning into a giant and wiping out the giants in that form. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff like that. So this is really interesting stuff, guys. I really hope that you have enjoyed it. This is only the first episode that I'm doing the next episode, we're going to be covering some pretty cool stuff. We're going to be talking about the mounds themselves, the burial mounds, because that's a huge portion of it. The earthworks in the United States, earthenworks. And we're also going to be talking about the Smithsonian. We're going to be talking about secret societies and what they're potentially using, why they're covering up these giants and everything, and kind of the whole controversy around that. I just wanted to give you guys kind of a base layer so you guys had a place to start from when we can talk about the giants in the next episode. I really, really appreciate you sticking around if you've done it this long. This has been a very difficult episode for me to record, and I love it. I love talking about this stuff. It's cool because it's in my own backyard, right? And as Americans, I think that we tend to think that our own backyard doesn't have anything, that there's no history here. And that's what actually most people do believe. But there is some pretty substantial history here. So let's explore it, man. It's wild, crazy. And it's worth exploring. It truly is worth exploring. So let's continue on. I hope you guys will join me on the next one. And I really appreciate you guys sticking around. Let me go and give you guys the Aaronic blessing. And we will just bounce on this bad boy, as always. And it goes like this. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May he make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord show you his favor and give you peace. As Shelley says, his perfect peace. Love you guys. God bless. Shalom, shalom. And until next time, Dark Web Theologians, Maranatha. Come, Lord Jesus. Love you guys.
Thank you for watching this episode of the Christian Theological Dark Web Podcast. For all questions, collabs, or comments, contact us at solo.to/thectdw or the Christian Theological Dark Web @gmail.com. To become a special access member or support our ministry, sign up on Spotify or Patreon. This has been another Four Dragons production from the CTDW. God bless, Shalom, Shalom, and Maranatha. Come, Lord Jesus.